Okay, when you do something that has to be done really quickly, and if it's for a client and it's something like an ad, that's a pretty big chunk of space to fill. So, um, typically, before I start, I want to try and figure out, okay, what is the style that I'm going to do this in? Is it going to be sort of modern and clean, or, can it be vintage, or is it hand rendered, or is it going to be all type? For something like this, a lot of the decision making comes down to how quick I can sort of think about creating something that's going to work. The number one job for me in these types of things, when I have to do things quick, is to make sure that I present a very professional looking ad, whether it's clever, whether it has a big image or an interesting image. The number one thing I want to cover off are things like making sure the headline, and body copy and everything sort of are filling the space. And that's one of the challenges with different size graphics. And it's no different than working super small. So if you're doing banner ads for a client, it's the same sort of thing. You're forced to work at a certain area and balance it out. So when we actually look at the size of this, and we actually think about the copy, there's a few things to consider. So the first thing I'm going to do is read the copy, right? For more than 65 years, firefighters have been supporting muscular dystrophy Canada, Canadians impacted by neuromuscular disorders in an incredible way. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, firefighters had to cancel many of their in-person Fill the Boots. So the idea behind Fill the Boots, I know this, is that firefighters stand on street corners, people come by and put money in their boots, right? That's a very simple visual for most people to understand. So that will probably be that's going to give me is going to be the key to creating a visual. Visual in this case is it doesn't have to be mind blowing, right? It has to get across this idea. Firefighters want to keep the tradition of helping to fill the boot alive, so they can't be out in their communities asking people to donate in a traditional way. So that's pretty important, that people know that it's not ending, that the muscular dystrophy is still you still have to raise funds for it. So when I'm looking this, what I'm trying to do is appeal to the audience in a couple ways, right? And it's a little bit tricky because even though you're doing it for the firefighters, you typically do not say, it's almost better to make it look like it's a third person, right? So with something like this, what I will try to do is sort of maybe bring attention to what the firefighters do every day, and then sort of flip that back to the audience. So an ask, right? So what you're basically having to do is read this copy, think about what the ask is, or what's going to pull people in with a headline, and then follow that up with secondary copy. So secondary copy meaning probably 4 or 5 lines that simplify this text right here. So one of the things we have to keep in mind here is that, and sorry, I'm working in Illustrator. I really should be working in design, but I'm going to draw this boot here in a second. So one of the things that you have to keep in mind at 10 by 19, that is a pretty big ad. So if I have body copy, the first thing you want to understand is that this is going to be an ad in a newspaper. It doesn't matter if the text is big. You just don't want it to overwhelm the ad, but you also do not want it to disappear. For something like this, going to 11 or 12 points, even 13 points is not the end of the world because it's such a big ad. So, that might be sort of, so just, setting up the main type, just getting it at a decent size is a good starting point. The other thing to really consider is how big um, how big this ad is, right? So one of the things that you want to sort of understand is that and I think you guys probably know this, is this area, whoops, sort of, I'm probably keeping relatively this area for a headline. And this is a really simple way to think about this. Probably keeping this area for image. If I just think about doing like really clean type, then I'm probably going to have sort of a follow-up to the headline, just because what happens with the headline is if it's anything other than what's right out of the copy, and it's interesting or provocative, it's going to have to be followed up and explained. So the last thing would be to, you're going to need logos, so sort of a lockup in there, as well as a lockup. There's probably going to be a secondary sort of call to action. So let's help, hashtag fill the boot, or a URL in this case will help as well. So I'm probably going to have one more thing that pops off of the page. So outside of breaking down a page sort of using those elements, it's just an easy way to work, right? So why make things super difficult for you when we know that people tend to read the page sort of top to bottom and sort of glance over this stuff. So, for something like an image, and we said no photographs, then you have a couple options. There's no way I'm doing a full illustration for this because there's a couple things. I think you bring more attention with the headline and call to action than anything I could think of for a headline. If I have an action shot of a fireman, I don't know. I just kind of think, well, okay, but then you'll miss out on the filling the boot part. So the most basic sort of, the most basic approach would be simply to sort of have a boot. And then, the idea of fill the boot is that it actually gets filled with cache. So that is a really simple approach. When I do something like this, if it has to be fast, if it has to be, really quickly done, I'm going to lean way more on creating a simple icon that is flat, that is easily readable. So there's no way I'm going to show a boot like sitting forward because you have to deal with toe, you have to deal with the top of the foot. All of those things are one more thing that makes it harder to read what it is. So with something like this, I am simply going to find an image, and I'm going to basically draw it, and I'm going to simplify it until it's almost flat. So I'm going to be using, I'll use some straight lines. So I'm just going to get my shape, and I think at this point most of you kind of know how to do this. But what I do want to avoid is doing anything that is too overly illustrated. So that's the reason why I'm trying to keep it fairly simple. I'll add a few little elements in there that sort of hint at the sort of industrial nature of a boot. But if you simply say, well, let's just see what we have, and does it need to be simplified? Let's just put it back there for a second. I don't even need, so this area in the back, really don't even need it. The difference between an icon and an illustration is sometimes you can simplify these things until all you have is the very essence of what that boot looked like. So I'm going to just give it a little indentation where the toe is. Let's just get it back in there. I do want to have those grips in there. So this part is more interesting because it's kind of like how much of this information do you have to put in there. I'll probably just simplify it to do a couple notches, and I'll probably have to clean up the angles on those notches afterwards. And it can be simplified quite a bit, and I'll try and go a little bit faster for you guys. I know this is taking up some of your valuable time. So I'm just using as many straight lines as I can so that basically it becomes more iconic. So this part of it, let's just see what we have. I don't mind making this part actually bigger so it overlaps. So if we sort of say, okay, well, I'll make this part black. Sorry, I've got a couple of things going on here. So I accidentally merged it together, so I just have to go back. So then I'll just make it fairly big here. So there's a couple little wonky areas. So let's just, now I can kind of determine how much of this information I want in there. So I could, for instance, give it a band, add a little bit of color to it. I could round it off, but I don't think I'm going to. So I don't want to have it like super busy, but I also want it to be a little bit realistic to what they do. So I think I want to have a gray boot, but I'm not 100% sure yet. And then the last thing, I'm just going to put a yellow band across there. And if you work with snapped points, it's easy to layer these things and have them work. So let's just say that that is good enough for now. I may end up changing it, I don't know. Okay, so sort of have my goofy looking icon here. So a couple of the things to consider here, you guys, is that uh, you know, an icon is an easy thing because any of you can do it. It doesn't it it's not so expressive that it becomes an illustration that you can look at it and sort of go, oh, I don't like the style, or I don't understand what's going on there. So in something with an ad like this, it's a kind of a no-brainer, unless just going with type is just it's a little bit um, it's a little bit too dry unless you really do something interesting with it. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to have this boot. I'm going to keep this ad relative. I'm going to try and keep it relatively open and modern and sort of inviting. So I'm not going to have anything like boxes in it. I'm going to just sort of so when you're deciding on like things like colors and stuff, well, I know for instance that yellow is a fairly it's a color that is associated with firefighters, so I'm okay with that. Some of the things to really consider, depending on where you're at, if this is an ad, where is it running? Are they able to actually run full bleeds? And printing presses have improved a lot over the years. Like 15 years ago, you would probably never run an ad that was sort of full bleed color because it would just be a mess. And there are times when that still happens, because what happens is there's something running opposite. Sometimes the black will actually run onto the ad itself, so that's fairly common in newspapers, but it definitely has improved. So all I'm doing is I'm choosing a little bit of a darker, a darker yellow, and a lot of you guys did the same thing. And at this point, I can kind of decide, okay, well, it's kind of straight up and down. This one is leaning forward. Can I lean it forward a little bit more, just to sort of just to stylize it a little bit more? And then a lot of you went in and gave it a little bit of texture, which is absolutely great. I think that's a nice touch. So let's see here if I have a brush open. I have one scatter brush, so I'm going to have to open up my brushes. I apologize. Should have thought about this before. Okay, so sorry about that. I've just opened up a free stipple brush library that I can provide to you guys. So all I'm going to do is just go darker. Oops, sorry. It's just go choose a darker color for my stipple. So I'll go to my brush. Just going to make this a little bit darker. So all I'm trying to do is relatively give the outside of it a bit of an outline. It helps if you actually have a brush selected. So you can absolutely change the thickness of that. So I'm going to go to a much thinner one to get more sort of dots. And then all I'm going to do is sort of draw around the outside of the boot. We'll see how that works. So in a very simple way, it gives you a little bit of texture. And then you obviously, you can change. I know some of you know how to do this already, but just in case you don't, you can once it's drawn, you can pull those points around, and you can change the density. So depending on how big your illustration is, you can absolutely change that. So it's a nice way of just taking taking a really flat sort of icon and just giving it a little bit of shape. So then all I'm doing is I'm just creating I'm just copying that outline again, and then I'm just masking. All I'm doing is masking the stipple itself, because you want the stipple to stay inside. And again, I know that lots of you know how to do this, but I think not all of you know how to do this. So we'll just quickly go over this. So I'm just going to click on these things. I'm going to do my clipping mask, Command 7, which I always forget to do, and then using my snap to point, I'm going to bring that back in, and then I can decide, okay, well, that isn't going to be nearly dark enough, so maybe I'm actually going to try sort of using black. Again, it's too much against the yellow, so I'm going to come back up, and it may have to be a combination of the two, because I'm going across gray, so I might have to do a gray line as well. So that's fairly subtle. I don't love that it's going across the gray, because actually the gray would be turned to black, but for this instance that's good enough. The other thing that I'm going to play around with, and I don't know if it'll work or not, it's just taking the real basic shape of the fireman's logo without doing the entire logo, and just plopping it on there. So really that it becomes sort of a silhouette, almost more of a illustrative piece than anything else. And some people know that crest. It is a fairly famous crest across North America. Originated in 1871 in Piattesville, Pennsylvania, when one of the firemen took a hankering to graphic design, and he sketched this out one day on using a quill feather pen and a turkey skin, and came up with this beauty. So that gives me kind of this really basic boot. Yeah, there's some issues with it, but good enough. So I'm gonna just scale out. So like I said, I'm gonna keep this yellow. Now, headline. So really, I'm gonna go back. So I mentioned to you that I had worked on this at a previous design firm that I used to be with, and it was a project that I had to do really quickly. The headline, when I thought about, so basically when they briefed us, it was okay, this is these guys at that time, it was like they're on street corners, they have these boots, people come by and put money in them, and that was sort of the key to me. So I sort of went with the approach of sort of showing money sort of in the boot, really simple way. And some of you actually did this. I believe Marta did this, and I'm not saying that that makes Marta smart, but it's a pretty good approach. But there is a dozen ways to skin a cat. So that's just one way. It's a quick way to show exactly what happens at these firefighter events where they fill the boots. People come by and put cash in there. So people, my thought was people will sort of hopefully recognize that, or at least at the very least get an idea that that's sort of what happens. So I'm just going to really make these a basic kind of gray-green that's dark enough to sit on the yellow. I'll make these ones start with the same color, and then I'll just pop them a little bit darker. So about 15% more black on those ones if you want them to make sure that you have some contrast against the other two. Again, if you're doing something like an ad, oftentimes the color reproduction is not the best. So all I'm trying to do here is just show sort of multiple sort of multiple dollars going in there, and then again, many of you did the same thing. I'm just going to do follow your cue, and I'm going to make this dead simple because I want people to get it very quickly. So again, one of the things that I'll try and do with something like this is is really to sort of keep the keep it fairly simple. Not going to overthink it too much. And then I could consider going in with a stipple brush on these ones as well. Just give it a tiny bit of texture around the edges. And with the stipple brushes, you do have sort of different densities, so you can sort of see what would work. All I'm trying to do is put a little bit of texture on it, so good enough. What I'm not trying to do is make it like hyper realistic. You just want to get the idea that there's some cash going in the boots, and that is about it. So with the headline now, I can see that the boot is going to be an issue here. So all I'm going to do is scale it down a little bit, because with something like this, it's not hyper important that the boot is big, right? Because my idea for the ad is that it kind of addresses a little bit of what we're talking about here. So my idea for this ad was basically it takes a lot of heart to fill these boots. So it basically plays with the idea that when we did this ad, this was right after 9/11 too, so it was even more sort of pertinent at the time. So the idea that to fill these boots, it takes a lot of heart as a firefighter, but it also takes a lot of heart from you to actually fill the boots with cash. So it kind of has a nice double entendre. So that was the idea behind the headline. Let's see here. I just typed it out. Yep. So here we go. We'll just pop this in. Now, so when I do something like that, I have to figure out, because the body copy is very much not the body copy is not it is not set up to really it's not set up to answer off something like that, right? It's just written by the client. So all I'm trying to do at this point is really have so all I'm trying to do is get one sort of done and in the book. So I am mostly trying to balance things off. So look at what I'm trying to do is make sure that you are leaving yourself areas that you can basically call white space, right? And even in here, what you want to try and do is just have a pacing where you have these breaks, right? And you can sort of see these breaks as we go down, and these don't have to be measured off, but this is the part that makes it fairly critical that you sort of have these gaps where your eye takes a break on these things, right? So once I have one, I can sort of just take a second to see where I'm at. I feel like it's a little bit leaning left. You all may be saying the same thing as I'm sitting there. The other thing that really strikes me is I've written a headline that says, it takes a lot of heart to fill these boots, but we're only seeing one boots. And that just sort of struck me as a bit strange. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this. And just scale this one back. I want to sort of make it seem like it's sort of sitting in the background. I also don't want to make it look exactly the same, so probably what I'm going to do is just go in, let's see here. I may consider flipping this, which means I'll have to flip the dollar signs. But if I do something like that, it'd be nice to have them overlap, but I don't know if that's going to be possible, or if that will just get too busy. So it does, obviously, sometimes it does take a little bit of work on these things to sort of experiment and see what is actually going to work. Okay, so yeah, moved the boot a little bit, made it a little bit smaller, pointed the other way, just put a little bit of drop shadow under there, and I think there was 2 or 3 of you that did something that was very similar to that. So again, not that that was the only solution, but it is a solution. So once you have something like that, that's, that has a fairly decent balance to it. But once you have something like that, it's pretty easy then to go, okay, well, I want to sort of slightly change the style. Maybe I want to make it a little bit more formal. So in this case, I could add a set of rules to it. And if I'm using a set of rules, then I'm going to use it across the board as an actual design system. So again, not that it's the right thing to do. It's just that the idea is that once you actually have sort of one done, it makes it much easier to work with what you have. So I could do a fairly, something fairly simple like that. Even the headline, right? If it takes a lot of heart to fill these boots. So let me think about this one. Give me a second. Okay, so some of you made reference to this, and I think it was a good approach. So the idea that this year everything is online. So this year we need to virtually, virtually fill these boots. This year we need to virtually fill these boots. So a little bit different, but relatively along the same idea, except it takes the heart part out of it. So keeping your writing simple with a little bit of emotion helps. Let's see that. So very easy to sort of address that, the same sort of thing. So yes, absolutely, you could simply do a button, as some of you did. I think the key with doing something like a button is that you kind of make it part of the actual, make it close to the graphic, or in this case you actually use the proper URL, which I should look up, but I'm just going to put this in here for now. So this would become part of the graphic. With things like buttons and stuff, I wouldn't overthink them, because they're not the most attractive visual to begin with, and you want to try and keep it somewhat simple. You could do something where it sort of sits over top of it or overlaps it. So if I do something like that, it'd be very easy to sort of just flip the elements on here. So again, I do want to have areas that I still want to have areas where there's things that line up. So in this case, I'm actually going to bring these ones up a little bit higher. So with logos, typically they never look too nice on an ad, but clearly very important for the client. But a good rule of thumb is really avoid putting logos up at a few of you did this, up at the top of the ad, because it will interfere with what you're trying to do with your headline, and it becomes really extra layer of noise that you don't need. So, and most viewers are pretty used to seeing logos down near the bottom. So whether they're right on the baseline that kind of that depends on how much other information. So a lot of times you will have things like addresses and things like that. So let's just have a look at that. And if I have a button up there, I'm not going to have rules on this version. I'm going to pull this down a little bit more so that becomes more it becomes part of the graphic a little bit. And our boots are pretty far apart. So a little bit of overlap I think could help. And again, that would I'm not 100% sure, but it's probably www filltheboot.cn. I should look this up, but really what I would want to have here is the actual URL to get to the website. And then the secondary copy here is getting a little bit close to the edge, you can see, so I'll adjust that. But then I'm going to then change this copy to sort of reflect the headline. This year we need to virtually fill these boots. So I could do something like this year we need to virtually fill these boots, comma, to help end MS. To help. So maybe I won't do that, but maybe what I would do is follow it up here. The other thing I could do is instead of doing a small subhead down there, I could adjust this so that my secondary copy sort of starts there. So here is where I would sort of say do a follow-up where I'm basically, what I want to say is in a very quick way is that the firefighters are still need donations to fill these boots to help people with MS. So if I do that, then what I could do is then sort of bring my bring all of my design down a little bit so that the actual button becomes a bit of a subhead to the actual body copy. So I think that is it. So a couple ways to do it. You don't even, you could do this thing without even making it really illustrative. You could do it more as silhouettes, right? So that type of thing, so that you just sort of have the the real sort of focuses on seeing the money in there. So that once you have it set up, it is a lot easier to do it. But one of the things that you definitely want to do is make sure you're using the document, right? Make sure you're using the size of this of the ad itself, and same principles that go into any type of design, right? So image headlines. If you have a headline that is provocative, you absolutely have to sort of follow it up to sort of explain it, and then relatively the same thing. So creating areas of white space, having your logos at the bottom of the page, not trying to do too much with the visuals, because it is relatively a simple call to action that a lot of people are sort of familiar with. So yeah, that's it. Hope this helps.